You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.
Hello, welcome to this week's Campus podcast, in which we're discussing the role of the university library and how these often iconic institutions have transformed in line with wider changes across higher education and society. I'm Miranda Prynne, campus editor.
And I'm Eliza Compton, deputy editor of Campus.
So, Eliza, are you a library frequenter?
I was a great library frequenter during the pandemic, and my local library was an absolute saviour, not just for books, but for other things like DVDs. So I'm a big fan of the local library, yes.
Yeah, I must say, clearly I used the library a lot as a student. I'd admit then there being a bit of a gap in my library visits, but now as a fairly new mother, when on maternity leave, my goodness, I appreciated the space that was offered by our local library and the many resources that go far beyond books. But within universities specifically, libraries hold a very special place. They really do sit at the heart of a campus, both physically and psychologically, as the place that one goes to seek knowledge and advance your studies and find quiet space to work. When I was at university, the area just outside the library was like a permanent cocktail party with people endlessly sort of stopping, seeing friends and others chatting, going in and out. But what I find particularly impressive now is how libraries have adapted to such massive changes in the way that content is stored and sought, and the way people study and seek information. And then alongside that, the nature of student and research support that's needed. And it feels like libraries haven't just adapted, but they've really led from the front and thrived as institutions leading digital transformation efforts and now AI literacy development. Even though the library itself as a concept is very ancient, today's librarians, for the most part, are not just deeply knowledgeable about research and information and data management. They're really tech whiz kids.
Yeah, they really are. And libraries have been evolving and taking their role as a hub within the campus very seriously. So integrating tech in a way that turns their spaces not just into silent places for study, but for creation studios and places for collaboration. It's really quite amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, we should probably introduce who we spoke to. So Eliza, do you want to kick off?
I spoke to David Green, who is the vice-chancellor of the University of Worcester. He's a Cambridge-educated economist, but with a career-long commitment to the value of education and its place in social equality. But the reason we're speaking to him for this podcast is that he's also a driving force behind the Hive, which is the only fully integrated university public library in Europe.
Yeah, it's an amazing initiative. Well, I looked across to the US and reached out to Lynda Kellam, who is the Snyder-Granader Director of Research Data and Digital Scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania. Before her current role, she was head of research data services at Penn, but she's also held previous data librarian roles at Cornell University and the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. She has a number of other accolades to her name. She also serves as the secretary of the International Association for Social Science, Information Service and Technology, IASSIST. But most recently, independently of her role at Penn, so very much in the guise of an individual who cares about protecting data and research, she has been a leading figure in efforts to save and store public data at risk of being erased. So, to provide some context, if we're talking about adapting to change, I think few higher education systems in the world have had to weather such dramatic change as that taking place in the US right now, where higher education and research has been thrown into some pretty immediate and dramatic turmoil by the Trump administration's numerous diktats, some of which have sought to delineate what is deemed acceptable scholarship or what merits funding, among many other things. One of the other major challenges faced by US researchers is that the government has arbitrarily removed or blocked access to certain public data sets in areas which sit at odds with Trump's ideology. So this deletion of really valuable public data has deeply concerning implications which reach well beyond academia, but academics and librarians have been among the first to respond, Lynda among them, and I was very keen to speak to her not just about her professional role at Penn, but also about how these efforts to protect public data have come about and how it's progressing. Hi Lynda, it's lovely to talk to you.
Thank you. It's nice to talk to you as well.
First, could you talk us through your role as the Snyder-Granader Director of Research, Data and Digital Scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania? What does this involve?
Sure. I'm manager of a team of data librarians. So I work with a group of people who are experts in different areas within research, data, and digital scholarship. So that includes things like mapping, GIS, programming languages, statistical software packages, digital humanities, publishing, digital publishing, research data management, and then my area of expertise, which is qualitative data research and qualitative data software. So it's a broad range of things that we cover within our department, Research, Data, and Digital Scholarship. And I help to provide the vision and mission and pay the bills and keep everyone working together and in the same direction. And then I also manage a space that we have in our department. So it's a lot of fun. Everybody has a lot of expertise in their areas, and it's fun to learn from them. We're doing a lot with AI in our areas now too, so that learning a lot in that and helping our colleagues and the students to learn about AI within the different areas of expertise that we have.
Yes, it strikes me that working within the university library sector, one can rarely stand still. So it's probably a good thing that you obviously enjoy learning.
Yes.
The list you gave there suggests that you really, really are very technologically adept. I guess the digital scholarship part of your title might be the clue there.
Yeah.
But have you sort of developed this expertise as your career has gone on, or did you train in sort of relevant skills? Like what led to where you are now?
Yeah, so I started as a data librarian in 2007, and my background was really in social science data, and I was brought in as the first data librarian at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro in the role where I was expected to build that data service from the ground up when nobody had ever heard of a data librarian. So for me, in that original role, it was really about data discovery. I had a background in political science and in quantitative methods and statistical software packages. And so it was really about, one, helping people find data sets, getting them ready for analysis, and then also a lot of work trying to teach people what data librarianship was. So a good part of my early career was spent, not only setting up that service at UNCG, but also writing about data librarianship. So I have a couple of publications that go into what it means. And it's really, having this long career, has been nice to see it change over time. So a lot of people after me came in as focused more on research data management because of the mandates from the government. So you could see the field shift from focusing on just finding data sets to more data management kind of questions. We had also more people coming from different kinds of disciplines, so not just social sciences, but also the sciences and the humanities. So it's been really exciting to see the field grow even more since 2007.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, the roles within your sector have evolved immensely in that time. Do you notice there's more specialization because it almost feels like it's grown as a sector and the number of different roles has grown as a result?
Yeah, yes, I think to some extent. I mean, there definitely were And there are still data librarians working who were around way before I got into the field, and they are the luminaries in our field that we look to, certainly in times like now. But I think the shift, when I first started the data librarian positions, there was a joke about the data librarians positions that they were unicorn positions. So they had these expectations that you could do all of the things ever. So you could do GIS and knew all of the statistical software packages and knew about science data and social science data. And so it was always kind of fun to look at a new job ad and say, okay, this is a bit unicorn. They're not going to find somebody who can do all of these things. So in the movement towards, research data management, the nice thing about that is that it did allow for us to specialize a bit more, as well as to mainstream data within libraries. And that was a big part of my interest as a new librarian. Was as the only data librarian at my university, I couldn't do everything for everybody. So I had to teach my colleagues how to do certain things so that they, like, if students were looking for just statistics, that they knew what the tools were to look for those statistics and can turn to those rather than coming straight to me for those questions. So we worked, myself and the business librarian at my school worked a lot to help train each other and train our colleagues on how to use those resources. So that helped quite a bit. But as the field has grown, we've definitely seen the development of multiple specializations within the field. So you have research data management, you have data curators, you have the data social science data librarians who help with data discovery, kind of like I was in 2007. And then you have other kinds of specialty areas, qualitative data, GIS positions. So there's definitely been a recognition that data as a service is not one monolithic thing that has a lot of different areas, and that if the library can have those positions, it would be very helpful for them.
Why did you choose a career in libraries?
That's a great question. I was a researcher. I was getting my PhD in political science and realized early on that it probably wasn't my path for various reasons. But I loved being a research assistant. And I think this is true for a lot of librarians who become academic librarians, that they work as research assistants and realize they love helping people do their research. They love trying to find the answers to questions. And so when I was thinking of what I would want to do after graduate school and talking to a lot of people, I decided that I thought library school might make sense. I didn't really know what that would look like. I had worked at a bookstore, but I had never worked at a library. And so I talked to a few people and then tried it out. I was lucky in that I had tuition waivers for my library degree. So I could take classes and get a sense of what was going on. And that then made me realize that yes, academic librarianship makes a lot of sense, that this is a great field to go into. When I originally started, I thought I would be an Eastern European bibliographer because my master's degree was focused on Eastern European politics. So I went in a very different direction with data. But at the time, there weren't many people coming from library schools who had data skills. It wasn't really taught in the library schools at that time. I was very lucky in that I was able to get my position. I was in the right place in the right time and had the right skill set and benefited from my predecessor retiring when he did. And I was coming out of library school at that time. So a lot of luck led to me being able to get into that specific field, and it set me on the path to becoming a data librarian.
Well, whether by luck or by judgment, you certainly chose very well, because goodness, you couldn't have chosen a more pertinent area to go into. We've talked a bit about how the broader library data information services sector has evolved over the last 15, well, actually nearly 20 years. How has your role and perhaps the focus of your work, how has that changed since the Trump administration came into power? Have you noticed any shift in what researchers are interested in finding?
I don't know if there's a shift in what they're interested in finding, but definitely a shift in what they are able to find. And I don't work all the time directly with researchers and in that data discovery role anymore, but I have fielded a lot of questions on how do we support our patrons when things are coming down or changing? And how do we think about information literacy in a time when the kinds of tools that we might have used coming from the government have changed, and people also are expressing distrust in certain kinds of in government information? So I think there's definitely been a shift in that sense to try and figure out what are the alternative sources, how do we talk about these kinds of the things that the government produces in our work. A lot of my role has shifted to focusing on raising awareness of the importance of public data, because that's public data is really the defining feature of my career. I've worked with public data for the 20 years, almost 20 years that I've been in this field. And so I was teaching the census when the census went down during one of the government shutdowns. So I've had this experience over a lot of time of trying to access government data and government information. And now it's really making sure people understand why this information, why this data is so important for every field that we work in.
Yes, I mean, can you expand on that a bit? Why is it so important for someone listening who's going, well, come on, we live in a world of data overload and information overload. Yeah. Why do we care if we lose one particular set among the many? Can you elucidate on that?
Yeah, so much of the public data we access it is the basis for which other kinds of data are created. So if you look at the library and the kinds of vendors that we subscribe to for data, a lot of the vendors are putting added value on top of public data. So if they don't have that public data, they won't be able to have a product that they can add value to. That's one part of it, that they themselves the private industry relies on that data for being able to do the things that they do. There's also the fact that private industry can't collect data at the same level that the government does, in the same scope or with the same breadth that the government is able to do. It just isn't feasible and they have no reason to collect that data for many sectors, right? Because their goal is to make money, not to collect data or to learn about the country. So there's that aspect of it. There's the more philosophical aspect of it, which is public data. Data is a form of information, right? They are as much a form of information as the books we read or the articles we read or any kind of a report that the government puts out. And having information is critical for us to have an informed electorate, which is a fundamental pillar of a democracy. So having access to public data is something that will let us have a more informed electorate, therefore a more informed or a stronger democracy. So I think you can take your pick when it comes to which reason makes most sense or which reason resonates, but there are a lot of reasons why public data and data that's created by the government is so critical for our country and also the wider world. That's another aspect. I've been talking over the past 6 months with a lot of people from other countries, and they say, this isn't just about you. What's happening isn't just about the United States. It's also about us because we rely on American data in a lot of cases. And so having a recognition that it's not just about an American problem, that it's a worldwide problem when it comes to the kinds of things that have been happening.
Yeah, I think your point that this data provides a kind of baseline from which a lot of other insight or layered stats are based, but equally on data enabling an informed electorate. Yes, this information is the basis upon which decisions are made at both an individual level, but also at broader organizational policy level.
Right. And the services that are provided are based on the census.
Tell me about the Data Rescue Project. I know this is something you are pursuing independently of your role at the University of Pennsylvania as an independent citizen, and this project is all about supporting data rescue efforts across the US focused on information that supporters of the project believe may be at risk of being deleted or taken down.
and you've been a leading figure in this initiative. So tell me how it came into being.
Yeah, we have to go back a little bit. So in 2017, there was a similar group called Data Refuge, and they were doing similar work, mostly around climate data and environmental data. And they were very concerned about, they were the first to actually raise the awareness of the idea that this data could be taken down on an ideological basis. And so in 2017, their work helped to spawn data rescue events around the country. So into 2025, we knew about a lot of us had worked on those or had been relationship or connections with the people who were involved with those groups. But those groups didn't exist. Data Refuge didn't exist as an organization anymore. And so we were trying to figure out what to do. And when I say we, it was mainly data librarians who are working through 3 organizations. One's called IASSIST, one is the Data Curation Network, and the other is RDAP. And so people who are in the leadership or members of those organizations, we were seeing a lot of emails coming from patrons or Slack messages about the CDC data being taken down. And we were concerned about, we knew we needed to do something. So the first step was to try and just amplify the things that already existed. One of those was the End of Term Web Archive, which is a partnership with Internet Archive and Stanford University and a few other groups, University of North Texas. And they all do web crawling every 4 years of the presidential web. So that includes websites as well as social media and all kinds of things. So there was that already pre-existing, but we wanted to make sure that the data sets were given the attention they require, because web crawling doesn't always necessarily get all of the pieces that are necessary for understanding a data set. And we are mostly, data curators, data librarians at heart. So we wanted to make sure that they were able to be given that care. So we got together and we were first just amplifying those pre-existing efforts. And we decided that we wanted to make sure that the social data was actually given the attention it needed, because we realized that the administration was taking down social data, not just environmental, not just climate change data, but also data that we called social data. So this would include things like the Department of Education, Institute of Museum and Library Services, and other kinds of data sets that were people focused. So it was really that effort, the data rescue effort of this project, was an attempt to preemptively rescue things that we considered at risk of being taken down, especially after we saw the USAID site being taken down, the CDC data being taken down. And we just called it Data Rescue Project. It's I don't know where that came from. That was kind of a name that stuck, and we started calling it that. And pretty quickly, because there was awareness of data rescue as an idea, I think people quickly realized, oh, okay, these are people, we recognize what this means, and we'll go to them and we'll turn to them for talking about this issue. And so we got pretty quickly got a following, a lot of volunteers, and were able to crowdsource the rescues asynchronously, which is very unlike what happened last time. Last time it was much more based on synchronous in-person events, and this time we knew we didn't have time to do that. So the volunteers right now, we have about 200 to 500 who are really active. We have a lot of people who've signed up who just may not have the time to necessarily do rescues, but who amplify our information on Blue Sky or are subscribed to our newsletter. So there's about 1,000 to 5,000 people who are part of that. And then we have also, as in this work, wanted to coordinate with other groups. So there's a lot of people interested in this. And one of those groups was like EDGI, is the Environmental Data and Governance Initiative. They have a group called Public Environmental Data Partners, and they do a lot of data rescues for environmental data. So we work with them closely. We work with another group called Safeguarding Research and Culture out of Germany. We work with people who are not doing data rescues, but who are really concerned about the integrity of data collection. And so that's like Data Index is one of those groups, America's Essential Data. So one of the things we wanted to make sure we did was to catalog and amplify the groups that were being created beyond just us, because we realized that we can't be the only group doing this work. Yeah, part of it's just been trying to help people understand kind of the lay of the land, and who's doing what.
Yeah, so coordinating efforts as well as obviously amplifying associated groups. And I mean, is this work to rescue various data sets or protect them? Because a lot of them haven't necessarily been removed yet. Is that just ongoing and it's going on all the time? Volunteers looking to different websites they feel might be under threat and crawling them and saving the data in presumably a repository where they think it's going to be safe.
Yeah, it's still ongoing. It's slowed down definitely with some things, but and just a little bit about that workflow. So we do, when we were given information about a data set or a website either coming down or if the staffing was being reduced drastically, those are the ones that we would focus on. So a lot of it hasn't come down, but we know that there's no staff in a particular office, and that's more concerning, or very concerning as well. Because if there's no staff there, it means that the data has no data steward, right? And so we want there to be stewardship over the data. So we are seeing three different things, really. We're seeing data being taken down. That's not as much data that's less data than the other two, which is data offices that have been gutted so much that there are no data stewards, or there's nobody in the office with expertise for the data. And the third way we've seen this happen is contracts ending. So it's not necessarily that the data is targeted. So the data may be somewhere, but it's that the contract is ending for either a web provider or maybe even cloud storage. And that's been threatened with some of the science data. So those are the three main areas that we were concerned about. And when we rescue that data, if we have indications that one of those things is happening, then we have a curation workflow that we use with our volunteers. And yes, they do end up in a repository, a public repository called Data Lumos through the ICPSR, which is out of University of Michigan. So everything that our group rescues, most of it ends up into Data Lumos. Some of them, if they're larger, might be in other places like Safeguarding Research and Culture. There are partners who help with web scraping. So some things might go to them, but for the most part, our work ends up in ICPSR's Data Lumos, which means that anybody can access it. It's publicly accessible the moment we put it into the repository and click the publish link. That was really important to me because I know in the early days, people were rescuing data for their own organizations, but it wasn't clear where it was going and it wasn't clear who would have access. And so I just wanted to ensure that the public would be able to access the data in some way. And so we have that workflow to be able to make it publicly accessible as soon as possible.
Okay, and can anyone who has rescued some data that is clearly of value, and as long as they can demonstrate the required credentials, can anyone deposit the data in there?
No, yeah, anyone can use Data Lumos. So Data Lumos was created in 2017 as a crowdsourced repository for public data in response to what was happening. And so anybody can add, they don't have to be a member of ICPSR. You do have to log in, but you could create a Proton email or something if you really needed to. We're happy to provide guidance if somebody wants to do that on their own, but anybody can add that kind of data to public data to ICPSR.
How then is this data being policed? Because is there a risk that someone just dumps a load of stuff that is completely false in there? I mean, is there someone kind of curating this or checking it?
Yeah, so we do quality checks on on the data that we put in. We'll help each other do quality checks it's not even so much the bad actor is that you might make a mistake on the naming of a file or something like that and it needs to be, somebody will notice it. So we'll do quality checks on our own data. ICPSR has a staff of curators who are going through and looking at the data that's been put into Data Lumos. So for example, again, it's not bad actors, but there were a lot of people who rescued the data from one of the offices in the Department of Education that was working in civil rights. And the civil rights data, I think there were probably 5 or 6 uploads because people were so concerned about that data not going down. So ICPSR's data curators are on the back end working to deduplicate that data as much as possible and to provide metadata that maybe our volunteers or others didn't actually include. So there is a cleanup that goes on. They can check and see what the files are. That's going to be an ongoing process. It's a very large thing for them to have to do. And just to give you context, between 2017, when ICPSR's Data Lumos was created, in 2025, I think it was about 100 data sets that had been added at that point. Since 2025, we've added about 600 data sets.
Wow.
So it's a lot of work. And we have workflows where we are helping them with some of the metadata work that they do. Our volunteers are helping them with some of the metadata work. But it's going to be an ongoing effort to do that. I haven't seen a lot of bad actors. I shouldn't say
no.
that.
I hope people have better things to do with their time, but
I know. I would hope so.
Because I was going to say, I mean, just the amount of work that all this requires is immense. Clearly, the fact that you have been met by a high level of support and interest, and indeed a lot of volunteers willing to take action on this is pretty imperative. Have you been surprised by the level of support?
I mean, I think there's some expectation that, yes, it makes sense in some ways. That I think the way we've framed it in the past, especially when we first started, was that we are wanting to preserve the nation's public data. This is about our country. It's not really a political question. It's about what we do as librarians, and we preserve data. And I think that allowed people who weren't necessarily maybe ideologically the same as me, space to be able to say, well, yeah, I want us to be able to have access to information, access to public data. So I think there's that, the tone we take in our messaging and the way we approach people, we've tried to keep it very focused on the positive, aspects of what we do.
When you say it's not political, I think that's a very good point to make. You referenced the end of term archive earlier, and that's been going for a while now. And for anyone listening who doesn't know, the whole premise of the end of term archive is that it saves government websites at the end of each administration when a new administration is taking over. So that suggests that these concerns over government data being lost are not entirely new. Is the difference now just essentially a question of scale?
Yes. I mean, it's not entirely new. And I work with a group called Preservation of Electronic Government Information. And we've been working since before the Trump administration with this question of how do we preserve electronic government information because of the challenges we've seen since government information went from print to electronic. And so it's an ongoing question that librarians have, that archivists have, about how do we preserve digital objects. But the scale that we've been seeing and the disregard for the data products that have been collected is just unprecedented. I've not seen anything like that. It's discouraging and disheartening in a lot of ways, because while there needs to be some reform to the federal statistical system, what we do is incredible. And what we're able to do in the US statistical system is incredible. The scale at which we can collect data, the kinds of questions that we ask, the surveys we've been able to do is a good thing, and it's a beneficial use of our taxpayer money. It's what government should be doing, right? And to see that dismantled in such a quick and often thoughtless manner has been very disheartening.
Of course, I mean, that goes back to our earlier discussion about the ability to collect this incredible and valuable data set is what has driven informed decision making and provides insight on every aspect of society, and not just in the US. As you point out, this is valuable around the world. You've highlighted there that a large part of the challenge here is the fact that this data now all sits in digital form, and therefore is terrifyingly easy to erase. while obviously digital tools also allow us to collect and analyze data at a scale that we never would have previously been able to. But it's interesting because it feels like digital tech here is both the destroyer and the savior in this instance. It's enabling the deletion of these data sets, but it's also enabling the crawling, the copying, the saving of websites and massive data sets in probably not a matter of moments, but in a manageable amount of time. So that's just one example. I mean, there are so many other examples of where AI and other digital tools are complicating factors for good and bad. But I'm interested as a librarian. I mean, do you see tech right now as friend or foe?
I would say neither. I think digital technologies are tools, and it's the person who wields the tool that is the friend or foe, right? The way we use them and the allowance for governance around them and the ability for people to opt in or opt out. I think those are the kinds of things that I'm more concerned about than necessarily the tool. I think the technologies that are coming out, certainly with AI or generative AI, there's a lot of questions that are left unanswered that I think we have to grapple with. And I think that the universities need to do a better job of directly grappling with those questions, and libraries need to do a better job of directly grappling with some of those questions about generative AI, rather than just thinking it's only about students plagiarizing or students using AI in classrooms, right? There's so many more problems or challenges that we could be facing, and having some kind of governance or some kind of responsible use of AI, either guidelines or framework for the library, I think is an important thing for us to be considering. And I do worry when I was in library school and there was this move to mobile, there was a tendency for some librarians to kind of pretend it wasn't happening. And I kind of see that happening a little bit sometimes with AI. They're either jumping onto it really quickly, or they're trying to pretend they're not, or say that they're not going to engage at all with it and just pretend it's not happening. And I think that puts it at a problematic space where we need to be engaging with these tools. We need to have understanding of how to use them in ethical, responsible ways, and demand some kind of governance over those tools.
Yes, it's a very wise answer. Of course, the temptation to bury one's head in the sand on things that understand is always strong, but it doesn't tend to work out very well. Finally, I wondered what you felt librarians at perhaps an institutional level could do if they've got researchers, academics coming to them worrying about the security, I guess, of their research or the data sets that they've collected. Is there anything that a librarian in this situation could do to protect the work of the academics within their institution, or the scholarship of that institution, or indeed the repositories that are sitting in their library?
First thing is just be sure to connect with your librarians about those things before trying to do your own rescue. I mean, I think especially when you're thinking about the repositories or the research data access, be sure to just communicate with your librarians. There's lots of librarians who have created live guides about data rescue, or who are doing data rescue events, or who have some kind of connection to the work we've been doing. So connecting with your librarians. We've advised people at Penn to go ahead and, if there is data that they find critically important, to go ahead and make their own backups of that data, not to rely on that website, or not to rely on the website continue being there. So at first I was like, well, is this alarmist? But it doesn't, after seeing what I've seen, I don't feel like it's necessarily alarmist to just encourage people to back up and back up the data that they're interested in using. But we also gave them tips on how to manage that data. So in some ways used it a little bit of a educational tool to say, okay, make sure you have good file naming conventions, and make sure you have backups. But I think talking to your librarians, talking to each other about what those fears are. If researchers are looking for data that has gone missing, they have different places to look for that. The data rescue project has a new portal where they can search for data sets and agencies, look at Data Lumos and see what's there. There's some overlap there, but that's definitely two places that you can look. Commercial data products are out there, or some companies have made backups of, especially the PDFs and reports and things like that. If you're looking for something that's more a PDF or report, there's several companies that have made backups and then have made a commitment to continue to keep them freely available. Internet Archive is another place we've been using. But get to know your librarians and talk to them about the work that they're doing, kind of the policies around the institutional repositories and the data repositories that are local to their communities. I think that if you talk to them about what they are doing and how they preserve their data, I think that would help to have a better understanding of what can be done for your own research data.
So there isn't one single repository where the information that's been saved has been placed. It is spread across a number of different sites based on different kind of schemes, initiatives and projects that are going on. But under the Data Rescue Project, is that quite a good place to find where things are likely to be?
The Data Rescue Project portal is where we would like to have a lot more metadata. We have a lot of metadata about data rescues. So information about what people have been rescuing outside of our own. If people are doing a data rescue, they're welcome to give us their metadata and we can add it to the portal. And that way you make the rescues you've done more discoverable for other people. The portal is the closest to a one-stop shop for data rescues. But again, it's crowdsourced, so we need the crowd to help us.
And it's an ongoing project. So your key message there really is speak to your librarians. They're going to be able to help. They are the experts in this. They'll probably be able to point you in the right direction. Brilliant. Lynda, it's been absolutely fascinating talking to you, both about your work at Penn and about the Data Rescue Project. Best of luck with it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
I'm always impressed by people that take action in the face of challenge and don't just sit there hand-wringing and voicing their woes on social media. Not that there's anything wrong with voicing your woes via social media, but in most cases it won't really help address the issues. And I mean, these data rescue efforts require a huge amount of work in people's own time, so it shows the value that people place in this stuff and a really impassioned desire to preserve the nation's records.
So much so, and so many layers involved in protecting this data as well. It was occurring to me as I was listening, all the different elements that need to be preserved and curated and stewarded through to keep it safe. I feel like what's been happening with libraries has almost undermined the idea of the library as a neutral space. I don't know whether that was just me looking at things through rose-coloured glasses. But especially when there's so much concern about protecting data, and it seems to really focus on things like climate, education, EDI, all these real hot topics at the moment. Now, speaking of people who walk the talk, so to speak, and really put beliefs into action, David Green, who I spoke to, is a similar example of this, albeit in a very different way. He is, as I said before, the vice-chancellor of the University of Worcester, and he's an economist specialising in international finance and has worked as a researcher and consultant in the private sector, but also at the beginning of his career for UK Homeless Campaign Shelter, and he's done extensive voluntary work in community organisations to support welfare rights and racial equality. Our conversation did focus on the Hive, which is Europe's only fully integrated university public library. But I think David's expertise and his commitment to the difference that education can make in people's lives is really evident in the library's mission. He's also led Worcester through significant growth in terms of both programs establishing the institution as a university and also as a driver of urban renewal, of which the Hive is a great example. And he was awarded a CBE in 2019 for his services to higher education. It's worth having a look at some images of the Hive because it really is a beautiful building. You can see where it gets its name. It's won loads of awards for its design, which follows sustainability principles with lots of natural light and varied adaptable spaces. And the Rob he mentions in the interview is Rob Sykes, the then Chief Executive of Worcestershire County Council. Hi David, and welcome to the Campus Podcast.
Thank you, Eliza. Very happy to be here.
Well, you are the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Worcester, which is a public research university in the cathedral city of Worcester in the Midlands. And we're here to talk about the university's groundbreaking library project. So the Hive is jointly owned by the university and the Worcestershire County Council and is the first project to integrate a university and public library in Europe, I understand. And it also contains one of the largest children's libraries in the UK. Over 5 floors, the council and university collections sit side by side and the staff work together. And unsurprisingly, given its innovative approach since its opening in 2012, the Hive has won 28 awards for design, contribution to the community and sustainability, including a Times Higher Education Award for Best Library Team. Now, I believe that you began working on this library project in the very first week that you arrived at Worcester in 2003. So to start us off, can you tell us how the project came about?
Yes, I was very fortunate in my first week at the university to meet the then Chief Executive of the County Council. And in our discussion, he told me that their library was dated. It was in a beautiful Victorian building, but it was not big enough anymore. And also that their archive was 3 miles distant at the County Hall offices, which had relocated away from the centre of Worcester to the edge of town. And that national policy now was that libraries and archives should be together, and asked me if there was anything I could do about it. I had long aspired to create a university and public library. And when I became what was then the principal of University College Worcester, because it took us a couple of years after I arrived to win university title, I knew that our library at the university was just not big enough for the student number. But it also, when I got around it, because it's something that I always do when I go to visit an institution, I always ask to see the library. I realized that it had the most wonderful collection of children's books. And it's had a wonderful collection of children's books because the University of Worcester is one of the biggest, and I'm delighted to say one of the best educators of teacher training in the UK, which is what we started off life as in 1946. So the result of that was that Rob said, well, it would be very good if we could work together on a project. And I said, absolutely, let's do that. And it's a bit old-fashioned, but I wrote a leaflet about it because I'd invited the Secretary of State for Education, who was Charles Clarke at the time, to come and speak at the university. And he'd kindly agreed, and he came to speak at the end of January. And so we had the sort of great and the good of people involved in education from Worcestershire and around, including vice-chancellor of the University of Birmingham, for instance, at the time, and others all came to hear the lecture by the Secretary of State for Education on where he thought universities were going. And I produced a leaflet with the then librarian of the university on wouldn't it be wonderful if we cooperated together. And we had to campaign for this. We had to raise money. We got the regional development agency interested because of the urban regeneration proposal aspect of it. And Rob and I worked on that project together for 5 years. We thought it would open in 2007, but as you rightly said in your introduction, Eliza, it opened in 2012 because it took a long time to do, and we had to do all sorts of things, change the Treasury rules so that we could make a capital contribution. The then Funding Council gave us a £5 million grant towards it because they loved the idea of a university and public library. And it's actually built on a dust cart, the old dust cart depot in Worcester. So it's helped the urban realm, but also, above all, it's produced this wonderful library with children at its heart.
Yeah, it's amazing. I did read that it used to be a factory and the dust cart depot, and before that, a refuse site that was thousands of years old.
Yes, back to the days of the Romans. We found Roman rubbish there. Found an oven for storing grain, and we found evidence that smelting had taken place on the site. And it's just the wrong side of the town ditch. You can see a fragment of the old city wall in Worcester, and it runs alongside a road which is now called the Butts, but was actually the town ditch. And it's where people used to come and throw their rubbish. And so we found medieval slippers, bell castings, all sorts of things. And so the archaeologists had a wonderful 9 months of work and dug all over the place. And it was a treasure trove of rubbish and past civilization. So
that's amazing. How fascinating. And you've got Shakespeare's marriage bond contract in among the archive. Is that right?
We have, and it's one of the treasures in the archive. When Her Majesty, Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth, came to open the hive in 2012, it was one of the treasures that was shown to her. And Shakespeare, as I think everybody knows, got married and a child was produced very shortly afterwards. And so he rode over from Stratford-on-Avon to Worcester, which is a long day's ride by horse, and registered the banns in Worcester, where nobody would know that he was doing something unlawful, because it was unlawful at the time to get married to someone who was pregnant. And you had to post a very considerable bond, which apparently his uncle subscribed. And if you were then found to be getting married in a hurry, you lost the bond as well as couldn't get married. So it was quite a big penalty. So he came over, and as far as we know, he also got married in Worcester. But mysteriously, on the date of his marriage, the register of the church where we believe he got married was torn out. And it's the one page which has been torn out. So somebody was clearly trying to conceal the crime, but they didn't get the marriage bond. So that's a fascinating bit of history.
Yeah, that really is a fascinating piece of history and a very good reason to go and visit the library. In terms of how the library feels and operates, what makes it different from a more usual university library?
First of all, you can just go in. There's no desk, there's no card that you have to present. So it is available to all citizens. Everyone can come into the library. Secondly, right away, right opposite you is the children's library. And if you come in on, I don't know, say a Tuesday morning, it'll be Bumps and Babies. Or then if you came in on Thursday, it would be Bounce and Rhyme. So straight away you have children being right at the heart of the library and their parents and quite often grandparents. And we designed the library so it got quieter as it went up. And then the floor above that is where the sort of front of house of the archive is, and which is actually the only bit of the library which is separate as a little gated area, and you have to be let in and out because people study records which are precious, and we don't want people repeating what that person did all those years ago to the record of Shakespeare's marriage. So you have to get let in and out when it's staffed. And then one floor up is the main library floor. And it's a bit like the famous TARDIS in Doctor Who, because it's much bigger than it looks. And there's lots of study space where quiet talking is permitted. So that means that students can work together on their projects. But what has happened spontaneously is that we tried to put the hive as central to the city centre of Worcester as possible. So it's a stone's throw away from the bus garage, which doesn't sound very glamorous. But insofar as there is public transport in Worcester, that is the best place to be. And of course, who uses the buses is children who are they can't drive, too young, and they use it to get to and from school and college. And so we found that homework clubs have started up, and there are literally thousands of young people who are not students at the university who use the hive annually, both students at other universities who come in and use its very superior facilities, and they love studying there, as well as children and young people who are at the local colleges and schools. And of course, they're the university students. And then if you went right up to the top floor, that's a silent study area. And when I'm taking people to visit the hive, I tend to just say it's the silent study area, because it's one of those places where if you go in and you don't just quietly sit down and start studying, people look at you and give you a death stare, because they say, what are you doing here? So we have what is, I suppose, quite traditional in the university library as well on the top floor. So that's essentially how it works, and it's got some other space as well. On the ground floor by the children's library, we also have things like art exhibitions. We try to have exhibitions on all sorts of topics, and we have quite a lot of school visits to things like a sustainability exhibition.
Increasing children's visitations and use of the library has been one of the real successes of the hive. I believe I saw increased use of something like 350%. I wanted to ask you a little bit about the importance of civic engagement. So we hear a lot about how important it is for universities to engage with the community, to break down the barriers between the town and gown, as they say. How important was building civic engagement into the plan for the hive, and as it continues to evolve?
Well, I think it's enormously important. Obviously, we could only have done this project with very strong engagement with the county council. And by the way, we also worked closely with the city council and at the time, and the then principal of the technical college locally. So we've tried hard to work locally, and I'm delighted to say that now the students at the technical college come and Heart of Worcestershire College come and get an induction into the library. And so there's an encouragement to study more widely. Civic engagement, very important. We have a little business centre, for instance, to encourage small business people to come together. There's some consultancy which is available for them from time to time. There's the sort of things that you might expect to find in a library, business directory, etc. There's electronic resources. There's some meeting rooms which people can book very inexpensively and conduct interviews. Technology is good at the hive, and so you can, if you wanted to, you could conduct a virtual board meeting. And I have to say that it's created a very positive feeling between the people of the city of Worcester and the surrounding areas and the university. We even had a local brewery made a beer called Hive, which of course had a little taste of honey in it. The other thing, if I can just say, Eliza, is it works with the natural rhythm of the school and academic year. So we're just, as we do this interview, we're just entering the school holidays period. We'll soon be there. And I can say that in 2 weeks' time, the hive will be full of children. What happens to children when the schools are closed? Well, they want to have activities of one kind or another. And grandparents in particular love bringing their children to the hive. It's free, it's educational and studious, and provides an activity and interest. The child can borrow a book, can sit in the cheese wall and read it. And of course, it's also sugar-free. Whereas if you go into the ordinary university library in July and August, you will find it very quiet. Mm-hmm. Actually, I have to say this is where the idea for having a university and public library first came to me, which was when I was a student many, many, many years ago. And I went back to borrow a book from the university library. And it was the middle of August, and I realized that this library, which was so busy normally, was so dead that if I'd had a heart attack, I might not have been found for some time between the book stacks, because there just was nobody around, and just a skeleton staff, essentially. And, that was at the Cambridge University Library, one of the 6 copyright libraries in Britain. So it's just very quiet. And so this works really perfectly and is very efficient. So, it's very busy over the Christmas period, the hive, very busy over Easter with children. But, in the main exam period, which we've just finished, it's rammed with students and the university students and others. So lots of politicians love it because it's also very efficient.
Efficiency is always good. It does sound that you've come up with a very good solution for managing the workflow. Has there been challenges in terms of bringing university and civic facilities together?
Yes, I think so. I mean, the hive opened in 2012. And of course, 2012 was sort of pretty much a peak period for what's widely called austerity. And there were very big cuts to the local authority. And we have a board which is 50-50, and we agreed a sort of book of rules before the hive opened, which covered things like opening hours and staffing, and agreed that if there was to be a move away from this, that both parties had to agree. And we actually take the chair of the board. 6 months, it's the university lead representative who has tended to be me over the whole period, and 6 months it's the senior officer of the county council. And at the time, the then senior officer, under orders of course and understandably, pressed for a reduction in opening hours. And you will remember that in that period, a lot of local libraries closed across the country. Mm-hmm. And in our neighbouring county, Gloucestershire, the closures were really quite significant. Well, the hive is open from 8:30 in the morning until 10 at night, 7 days a week, which is an awful lot for a public library. And of course, our former library is also open 24/7 for self-study. And the local authority wanted to limit the opening hours to see if they could save a couple of staff salaries. And we considered it very carefully, and we said no. But obviously we said no in as cooperative and positive a way as we could, and did our best to try and find other savings which wouldn't impact on the experience of people. So that was a challenge. But generally, it's been a great political success. The councillors the people, broadly speaking, across the political spectrum, are very supportive of the Hive Library. They think it's great.
Libraries are often a bit of a haven for people, especially we've been going through a heat wave here in Europe. I imagine the library is a very cool oasis amongst that. But also it must help to demystify the university particularly for young people, for children who might be thinking about whether higher education is going to be part of their future or not.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And one very interesting program was started by a school which is located in one of these post-war local authority estates, and the school has what is now quite a deprived population catchment area. And the head teacher, who had been a member of staff at the university, started a program because the mothers in particular, a couple of fathers, came to her and said, we want to help our children, but we don't know how. So, and she found out that their reading skills were quite weak and things, because the first thing she said was, well, read to your children. And so she developed a program for this. And then, which included the mothers going to the hive and taking out a library ticket for their children, so the children could borrow books over the summer holiday. And then she realized that as the mother's skills were sometimes quite weak, she said, well, and now the next phase of the program is you have to take out a ticket. And also there was some adult literacy work that was done. So that was really valuable work. And, I mean, she was a very good primary school leader. And there was also, the children would elect representatives from the age of 8 onwards to raise issues and get used to democratic participation. And I think that sort of activity is reaching out and helping people feel that their future can be something else. And then, of course, everybody who comes into the library walks past a sign with logos saying the Hive Library is a partnership between the University of Worcester and Worcestershire County Council. So they know they're in a library, which is supported by the university. And also smaller children see bigger children who are students, going up and down the stairs and studying. And that's really important. And then one other little detail I'd like to give you, Eliza, is that we have, as I said, we're a teacher training institution, as amongst other things, a very good one. So we have all these resources for our teacher training students to teach primary school classes on, I don't know, a particular religion, for instance. And there will be artifacts, candles, for instance, a menorah. There will be teaching about the life cycle of insects. There's a whole thing about a bug's life. And then, of course, lots of things on mathematics. And if you are a parent or a childminder running a small nursery class, you can come in and you can borrow that as a citizen. And we've had very little of that material go missing. But of course, what happens to it at this time of the year, once the schools have closed, is that material isn't used. But it can be used now by childminders, and they take it out, and it can be used by parents. You've got a group of children, your friends' children coming round. You can use it for the day and have an interesting activity. You should learn a bit more about insects or birds. This is the opportunity to do so. And you've got material which you would not be able to get in any normal library, because we've as it were, we've put our collection there, and you can take it out as if it was a book.
Wow, that is really incredible. This joint venture was the first of its kind in Europe, I believe. But have you got any sense or any examples that this is a model that has been adopted elsewhere, or are you still out there pioneering on your own?
That's a very good question. The University of Gloucestershire is about to open a library, which is a public and university library in Gloucester. And I don't think it's an accident that the librarian used to work at the University of Worcester.
Right.
Gloucestershire librarian. But it's not an integrated library. Ours is integrated. Theirs is, I think the university is going to be on the top few floors, and the county council is going to be on the bottom couple. And I know where that idea came from, because I showed round the former MP for Gloucester, this in 2012, 2013, something like that, because he came with the then MP for Worcester, who was a great supporter of the project, as is the new MP for Worcester, whose children use the library. And he's immediately pro-university because, his children love the library. So going back to your earlier point. But we've shown many, many people from around the world, around the library. And I think you need to have people in the leadership of the organization who believe in a project like this to make it happen. And I think we were very lucky with the then chief executive of the county council. I don't want to criticize anybody who's been there since, but I just think we hit somebody who was open-minded and also had a problem to solve. Everybody has a problem to solve. He had a problem to solve. He had a library that was no longer really fit for purpose and an archive that was 3 miles away from it. And so, we hit that sweet spot at just the right moment with the right person. It also helps the modernization of libraries because, of course, people think of libraries as full of books. And there's been this evolution of modern information technology. More and more books are taken out as sort of e-readers and things like that, e-books. Well, of course, the university is ahead in all of that. And we have a wonderful electronic journal collection. We no longer have rows and rows of the American Economic Review or some other very important journal. We have an electronic subscription. And that's all available and accessible, and the modern technology is ahead. So you just have to get that balance right. And I think that there will be others who follow it, but it is a frustration that it's been so widely supported and welcomed as a great idea and used by government ministers, often as an example of a really good joint project, but people haven't copied it in practice. And I'm one person who believes that plagiarism is the sincerest form of flattery.
Well, perhaps, as you say, you just need that right combination of the right people and the right space and things. Now, I know we are butting up against time, so I just wanted to ask you one more final question. What's your favourite space in the Hive?
My favourite space is the cheese wall, which is where children who are usually somewhere between the age of about 7 and 12 or 13 come and park themselves and read a book in a position which, as an adult, I would find very uncomfortable to get in and out of. But of course, because of their great flexibility, they just zip in. And then you see them, and it's just wonderful that that you just see the students of the future just curl up with a book in a public place in a space that they feel is their own, and they're very happy. And I also love seeing it because we created some sort of cubby holes where you can place a book, and then children can go and put their finger in and see, oh, there's a book there, and see if that's opening something, a new world for them. So it symbolizes that. And I think that is so wonderful for the future as well as the present. And it gives me great pleasure when I just go into the Hive and I see a child who wasn't born at the time that the Hive was opened, enjoying themselves and losing themselves in a book.
Well, thank you so much for this introduction to the Hive, David.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eliza.
So I found this conversation with David not only inspiring in terms of the real power that this kind of project can offer universities in terms of educating and introducing the next generation of learners to the library and the university, but also of how the built environment can literally bring the university and the city together. So it's terrific that it's had so much support, and it will be really interesting going forward to see whether other institutions or municipal counties do pick up the model and run with it in the way that Worcester has.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to see that happen. I actually found this a really quite moving interview. I think it was something about the idea of the opportunities that this fundamentally quite simple concept of a place that you can come and have access to books and other resources as being actually such an amazing kind of foundation of opportunity for anyone. And I found the fact that the Hive is offering that in such a positive way really quite a moving thing to hear about. And for more resources and advice on what libraries can be doing to better serve students, researchers, but also the public at large, do head over to campus at www.timeshighereducation.com/campus. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like and subscribe, and we will be back with you in a couple of weeks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You're listening to a Times Higher Education podcast.